So in 1974, Bernard Sadow was lugging his two 1970s hard-sided suitcases through the airport. He was coming back from a vacation in Aruba with his family. He was carrying all of their belongings in his two suitcases. And as he walked through the airport, lugging these things beside him, he was watching these porters and baggage handlers with these big pallets that had wheels underneath them. Now in the 1970s, there were no wheels on suitcases, or at least at that time, there weren't any wheels on suitcases. So he's machoing his way through the airport wondering and thinking to himself, there has to be a better way, because this is ridiculous. So he went home and he found an old truck that he had with the wheels on the bottom. He took the wheels off and put them on the bottom of the suitcase and then attached a strap to the side. And with that, that was the first time that he came up, 1972. That was the first time that he came up with the roll-along suitcase. A couple years later, 1987, Robert Platt, who was a pilot for Northwest Airlines, changed the design and did an upright suitcase with wheels on the bottom, two posts, and a telescoping handle. So the interesting thing, one of the interesting things is that this changed the way we travel. Oh, okay.
You're a talk right now.
All right, so the interesting thing is this changed the way we travel. It was a creative change to something that had been in place for a long time. But if you think about it, wheels have been used for transportation for thousands of years. And we've been using luggage for hundreds of years, and yet it wasn't until 1972 that somebody thought to put wheels on the luggage. So the question here is, what caused Bernard and Robert to finally change the way that they were thinking about things? What allowed Bernard to destroy the blueprint of the way things were and create something new? And even as he was trying to sell his new product, he would get responses like, well, this is just the way it is. Tough guys don't need wheels, they just make it through the airport without them. So in order to even propagate these ideas, they had to destroy an idea that pre-existed it. So a lot of people like to talk about creation and a creative idea, the creative spark. This is just an image of how wheels are used. A lot of people like to focus on the creative spark, that moment of idea, that moment of inspiration. But what we don't talk about is the destruction that's necessary before the creative spark can catch fire. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So when I first started thinking about destruction as a concept, I was in India. This was about a year ago, and I was on a meditation tour. And we started out in Calcutta. And one of the women that I was on this tour with, we had an open day and she went shopping. And she came back with this necklace of skulls. And I remember thinking that it was really ugly. So I asked her about it because I was curious. And she explained that the necklace represented Kali. And Kali is a Hindu goddess of destruction. And she said you wear the necklace to invite Kali into your life, to destroy whatever needs to be destroyed, and make the way clear for whatever is going to come next. And it was such a startling idea to me to invite destruction into your life. And it stuck with me, even though I didn't really like the idea. But the thing with India is destruction and creation are all around. Creativity is basically a necessity in a world where resources are really limited. A lot of people have to use there's so much destruction all over the place that when you look at even housing, it's built from old housing, it's built from old pieces of something. So this was perfectly exemplified, creation and destruction were perfectly exemplified for me with the cremation grounds of Varanasi. So Varanasi is a holy city on the Ganges River, and there's about a city block taken up by the cremation grounds. And they process about 100 to 150 bodies every day. It's out in the open. And actually, most tourists aren't really allowed to take pictures, so I'm not sure who was able to do this, but I didn't find this online. pyres are out in the open, so you can go watch, and it's a completely different experience. And for city blocks around, there's stories and stories of wood piled high waiting for the funeral pyres. Here's another shot from above. So as these, like I said, there's 100 to 150 bodies processed a day. Families will bring their family members shrouded, and they'll bring them down to the pyre. And the men will be allowed to stay, the women say their goodbyes, and then the women are escorted off to the side because in the past they've had women who have wanted to follow their loved ones to the other side and throw themselves onto the fire. So the men are allowed to stay and tend to the fire until the ashes are burned down. So the interesting thing is not the pyres themselves, which are fascinating and a very different view of death, especially given that with our culture we're pretty far removed from death. We don't really have anything to do with it. But just down the bank where the ashes filter into the Ganges River, you'll find every day men panning for gold. And what they're doing is they're sifting through the ashes of all of the bodies that have been cremated, and they're looking for the gold fillings. And this is a little bit startling at first to think about, but what they're doing is they're creating from the destruction, they're creating a livelihood for themselves. They take the gold and they sell it and they feed their families. The thing is, we just don't really see, so the principle that I got from the trip to India was that creation and destruction go hand in hand. It's a constant cycle. It's just that we don't tend to look at it. We like to think about the fun ideas. We don't like to think about the destruction. And we don't tend to see the whole for what it is. Destruction and creation are like yin and yang, like light and dark. One does not make sense without the other. So in a moment, or as we go through the next few moments, I'm going to walk you through a mental model for thinking about destruction and creation. And I'm going to share my own story with this mental model. And it's not like I knew that this was going on at the time. It's taken a couple of years of looking back to see what I was doing with my own life. So let's start with status quo, which I like to call comfortably numb. When I was a little girl, I really only knew two things. I knew that I wanted to be happy, and I knew that I wanted to travel at some point. And whenever I envisioned traveling, I didn't have a place I needed to go. I just saw it as an open road, usually alone, and usually with no end limit to it. So I grew up in Minnesota, and I went to high school where the question wasn't, what are you doing after school? It was, where are you going to school? And it was expected that if you didn't answer with a four-year college, something was wrong. So it wasn't really accepted to go to a community college. It wasn't really accepted to do anything but go to a four-year college. And my parents wanted the best for me, wanted me to go to a four-year college as well. So to show you how ill-prepared I was for this decision, I really shouldn't have been thinking about a four-year college at all at this time. I applied for 3 schools based on the fact that I had friends that had gone to those 3 schools. And I think I chose Iowa State based on the fact that it was warmer than the other 2 schools. So, stellar criteria. I was also an out-of-state student, so I ended up paying out-of-state tuition for my degree. Also not a good idea. But it was just kind of the way things were done. It was kind of the accepted thing. This is what you do. And I didn't question it. And I didn't really know any better. So I went. Graduated with a degree in psychology and criminal justice, assuming that I would go to law school. When I got out, I really wasn't ready for that continued education. And I started working as a criminal defense investigator for the public defense office, first in Minnesota. And I got to be in the legal field, which I really enjoyed. And it wasn't long before I moved down to Iowa and switched to working for the Civil Rights Commission as an investigator and a mediator. I was there for 6 years. The funny thing was, as I was growing up, I never thought that I wanted the marriage, the kids, the house. I never really thought I wanted the blueprint that we're all kind of told we need to get. But I ended up in a situation where I had this full-time job, I had debt, I had a long-term boyfriend, and I had a house. And I didn't really know it, but I was really, really numb. It took something for me to see how numb I was. I was part of all of the boards. I was a volunteer for who knows how many organizations. I was meeting new people all the time. Nothing was really wrong, but I actually wasn't really that happy. Nothing was really that fulfilling. And I would catch glimpses of it when I would go to work and sit at my cubicle, and I'd have to eke out so much energy just to get something done at work because I just wasn't internally driven. So, for me, the thing that kind of jolted me out of it was the trigger. And I found that triggers can be intrinsic or extrinsic, just to give you an overview. Intrinsic, and sometimes they can go together. Intrinsic is that moment where you just think, I just can't do this. 1 minute it's okay, the next minute it isn't. And that can happen for any reason. And extrinsic could be something like, you just got fired. And that changes your world. So the trigger for me came in the form of a person. Molly was someone that I worked with at the commission. She was a great grad, and she was going for journalism and wanted to be a writer and editor. So Molly was part of the mediation program, and we had such limited space at the commission that we had to share a cubicle. So we're sharing like an 8x8 space. And I didn't know her when she moved into my cubicle, so I'm thinking, I really hope this person's cool, or this is going to be hell. So she moved in, and she was just the sweetest person. She had such a great personality. We talked probably way too much, and she was a good friend. I remember, I think in January or February, there was some day where there was a terrible blizzard, and it was negative 20 degrees. And of course, I had failed to pack a lunch. And of course, I also wanted pad thai from the place that wouldn't deliver. So I asked her if she wants anything. She doesn't. She already brought her lunch. She didn't need anything else. So I order, and I'm strapping on my boots and getting ready to go. And she starts to put her coat on, and I say, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Well, I don't want you to walk alone in the cold." Good friend, and I've never forgotten that, because I don't think I would have done that. So the other thing about Molly was that we could talk. She was the first person that I could talk to very openly about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because she had the same struggles. And for me, the heritage of depression and anxiety has been passed down through my family. So those are the only people I had ever discussed it with, and for the most part, they weren't people who were really doing anything about it. They were just kind of in it. So it was interesting to talk to somebody my age who knew what I was talking about and could relate in that way. So we shared a cube for about 10 months. She was also from Minnesota. She eventually decided to move back to live with her parents. This was in August of 2010. So August of 2010, she moved back to Minnesota. October of 2010, I'm in the very same cubicle that we shared when I get the phone call from her father saying that she took her own life. I still get emotional with that. So I remember laying in bed that night, and it took me a long time to get over it. Who gets over it? Let's move on past it. I was laying in bed that night, and I just had this very clear, distinct thought. If you don't do something different, this is going to be you. And what that meant to me was, you're not doing enough. There's something you're missing. I was still too numb to really know what I was referring to, but I knew something wasn't right. I knew I was too numb, and I wasn't really even feeling anything anymore. So over the next few months, I started exercising. I started treating myself differently, and this may seem counterintuitive, but I got off the antidepressants, which were kind of adding to the numbness of the entire experience. And like I said, at the time I was in a long-term relationship, I was at a comfortable job, I was on all of these boards, and slowly things started to fall away. I kind of moved out of them. Within 9 months, I had another trigger moment with my ex-boyfriend, and 1 minute, this numb, comfortable relationship was okay, and the very next minute it was absolutely not okay, and it was over. 9-year relationship. Throughout this process, and I want to say throughout this process, the dream of traveling was still kind of there. I would sit at my desk and it would just be kind of back here. It'd be the fantasy. It'd be the thing that I wanted to think about when I didn't want to think about work or whatever I had to do. But it just seemed like a pipe dream. There were too many things in the way. For example, the relationship, the ownership of a house, the debt, and at the same time my mother was ill. And it felt like there's no reason, there's no way for you to go with all of these obligations and relationships and reasons to stay. So these things started to fall away. The relationship ended. A year later, my mother passed away. And with her passing away, she worked very hard and she died at a young age. So she left me with enough to pay off my debt. So within a year and a half of Mama passing away, every reason that I've ever given myself for not going and not fulfilling my dream wasn't there anymore. But it became clear to me that those weren't actually obstacles the way that I had made them obstacles. That's what I blamed my status quo on, and then they were gone. And it became clear to me months later that really they weren't even obstacles. They were just my reasons for staying in the status quo because the status quo is so comfortable. So I have this year of triggers, is what I'm saying, which led me to the clearing. So the way I thought about 3 stages, just to simplify it, because I know the story is a little bit convoluted. Status quo is like an empty house or an empty building. It's been cleared out, no one's using it. It's been on the horizon for years. So no one even thinks about it anymore, really. It's just there. It's a part of the landscape. The trigger is that moment of implosion. The thing's wired for implosion. If you've ever gone and watched a building implode, it takes only a few seconds, and it's gone. It's kind of amazing. So 1 second, things are one way, and the next second, they're just radically different. But the clearing, just because the trigger happens in a few moments, the clearing takes months, sometimes years, to clear out all of the rubble before anything can be built on top of it. So for me, after this year of triggers, what I was really in was a clearing, letting things kind of sift out, feeling my own emotions, processing. So I get to this point where I really have no obstacles. There's just really no reason for me not to be going, but it's still very comfortable. So I finally have this one last trigger, about 9 months after my mom passed away. And I had been visiting my father in Minnesota, and I went to a Kundalini yoga class. And if you've ever practiced yoga, you know anything about Kundalini. It's highly energetic, and there's actually a lot of yoga teachers who warn against ever trying it because it can release a lot of unexpected stuff. So after this class, I was getting ready to drive back to Iowa, and I had this completely overwhelming wave of emotion come over me. And this wave of emotion, the best way to describe it is as all of the years of status quo rolled into one thing and hitting me in the face. And it was basically this feeling of you are in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing, and you damn well know it. And it was so intense that I just started crying right there. It was so strong, I was like, you know what, okay, I'm done. I don't even know what's on the other side, but I'm going to quit. I'm going to go do what I always wanted to do. But it's funny, my status quo was so comfortable that as I'm driving back, the feeling started to fade. And I actually had the thought, oh good, this is going away, and I can go back to pretending everything's okay. But it actually didn't go away. The next few days, it was not as intense, but it lingered. And so by Wednesday or Thursday of that week, I walked into my boss's office and gave her my resignation. So that alone obviously takes quite a bit of time. It takes time to dismantle life and say goodbye to friends and some relationships, sublet a place, and then take off. So what happened was I took 2 months, and within 3 months, I was on my first plane trip to Ecuador. But I traveled for about 5 or 6 months. And I started in Ecuador. I went to Peru, I went to Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Guatemala. And along the way, I didn't have a plan. To my parents' chagrin, I did not have any plan at all, and I had no advance reservations. It was just buy a ticket, go, buy a ticket, go. And I let myself travel completely freely. And because I didn't want to have to repeat all of my stories or make a dozen phone calls to keep people up to date with what I was doing, I kept a travel log. And I just said, hey, you want to know what I'm doing? Read this. I'm probably not going to call very often. So I kept this travel blog, and surprisingly, people really liked my writing. I had no idea I was a writer at all, but in fact I had been writing for 8 years. I've been writing investigative and legal reports, and I had to write them in such a way that people who were complainants, who could have any range of educational experience, so we're talking people who possibly weren't high school graduates, to highly professional individuals, and then on the other side, the respondents and their attorneys, people who were business owners, people who were attorneys, judges. So I had to write for this wide range of audience so that everyone could understand what I was saying. But I didn't consider myself a writer because I hated writing. Writing investigative and legal reports was incredibly draining and tiring and so boring, especially when you're talking about the same legal analysis over and over again, and even more so when you're really dealing in lies, which is, when you work in the legal field, something that you experience pretty in-depth. It was so boring that I would try to sneak in movie references, like really obscure movie references, and see if anyone would notice, and no one ever noticed. So anyway, I didn't think I was a writer, but as I'm keeping the travel blog, people are actually liking it. It's not like I was really publicizing and doing a lot, but I was surprised how many visits I was getting, and I was surprised how many comments I was getting, and how many people actually liked the stories that I was coming up with. And this is the first time that I was just creating and writing about whatever I wanted to write about, whatever was going on for me on that trip. So when I left, of course, you know, when we think about just quitting a job, by the time I quit, I was 30. So it's not like it's, you know, I'm young and have, you know, all sorts of years in front of me. I am young, and I've got tons of years in front of me, but there's still that gap. No one wants that resume hole in it that they want to explain. So of course I leave, and I'm like, this is what I'm doing when I come back. I'm going to be a mediator, I'm going to start my own business, I'm going to continue what I was doing before. And I was really stuck on that idea, continuing what I was doing before. But the writing I absolutely loved. And I was surprised that people liked it. So I started to think about how can I actually make this work further out? You know, is there anything here? Until a friend of mine who had started a magazine messaged me while I was traveling, and she said, hey, I want to do a feature on your story, on your trip. Can I put a freelance writer in touch with you to write a story about you? And I don't know what made me say this, but I wrote back and was like, hey, can I just write the story about me and you print it in the magazine? And she said, yeah. And so that was my first printed piece. And from that, I was able to start building a portfolio. So the idea was there, but because I was still stuck on my old way of life and I was still thinking of going back to what I had been doing before, it took quite a while to embrace it. I came back from my trip to South America, and I was getting more and more opportunities to write, but it was kind of like this side thing, like, oh yeah, that's fun, but this is not actually what I need to be doing. I need to be mediating, I need to be professional and in the legal field. And it had a status for me to think about myself as a professional in the legal field as a mediator. It meant something different. Or a writer, I don't know what I thought, you know, someone creative, someone a little bit neurotic, someone a little bit, maybe a starving artist type. So I kept getting opportunities with writing, and I would take them, but I wasn't actually spending any time there. So finally, I had to really think about it because nothing was working. I was splitting my energy between too many things. Mediation, writing. I was also waiting tables. I think I was doing something else too, teaching yoga, maybe another job. Who knows what I was doing, but none of it was working because I was completely scattered. And finally I had a mentor who said to me, "You're doing really well with the writing. People like your writing. Why aren't you just writing? Stop calling yourself all these other things and be a writer." And he had a great point, but I was just still not ready to accept it. So I was actually in this mentorship program in Des Moines at the time. And I think there was 30 mentees and then about 15 community leaders. And I was the only self-employed one of them. Everyone else worked for a corporation. And so we had this day where we had this presenter who was extremely energetic. And he's just calling out people left and right. And he's saying, "Where do you work? And where do you work? And where do you work?" And as he's going around the room, I'm thinking, what am I going to answer? Like, where do I work? I can't answer it like this. And for some reason, this is within days of that one conversation, he points at me and he goes, "What do you do?" And it was like this on-the-spot moment of, oh my God, what do I do? Which one do I answer? And the thing that came out of my mouth was, "I'm a writer." And so from then on, I finally said, okay, I'm just going to call myself a writer. If something else comes up, fine, we'll explore that, but this is it. So then I took action on that. Which, it's one thing to say I took action on being a writer, but it's another to actually let go of the rest of the stuff. And that was the harder part. It's easy to go move forward with being a writer and pitching ideas and trying to meet people and present yourself that way. It's a lot harder to turn down the stuff that comes up that's still over here, because of course it's going to come up and test you. So that's how I got to where I am today. I'm a freelance writer and editor. I work with quite a few different kinds of people. I love helping others get their message out, and I love helping people clarify what they're saying. But it took a lot of work to get here, and I never would have thought of myself as a writer 3 or 4 years ago if I hadn't first destroyed the idea of what I was and what I needed to be and what I was supposed to be doing to become what I actually am now. And I will say that this cycle is never over. I'm still going through it all the time. And I've also noticed that I think we get stuck in some of these. See some little arrows up there? I think that it's easy to get stuck. And I think most of us get stuck in status quo. That's the softest, easiest place to be. And it's the hardest to get out of. And the more that we cling to the status quo, the bigger the trigger needs to be before we'll actually let go of the status quo and move forward. But you can get stuck in other places. I think in the last month I've been stuck in triggers, just one crazy thing after the other. I have friends who are really good idea people. They're the ones who you go to when you need an idea. And they can produce and produce and produce. But the moment you start to analyze the idea or try to move forward with the idea, they just kind of fall apart. They just really don't like that part at all. And they can get stuck when you try to move into analysis or try to move forward with action. Well, what about the idea? What about this idea? Let's come up with a new idea, and a new one, and a new one. So you can get stuck in any one place. So why do we avoid destruction? I think destruction is scary. This is Kali, and I chose deliberately one of the scariest photos of her. But if you go Google Kali, most of them are not really, they're not pleasant. She's not the pleasant, welcoming goddess. And the story behind Kali, well, there's many. She has many, many birth stories. But the main one is that Kali was born in battle. And she was actually born from another goddess named Durga. And Durga was fighting a battle with several other gods and goddesses, and they were losing because this particular demon, this is going to be kind of a crazy story, this particular demon, every time he would sustain a cut, his drops of blood would hit the ground, and more demons just like him would sprout from every single drop of blood. So they couldn't slay him because every time they would cut him, more of him would come. So So soon they were just overrun with this demon who's just destroying this battlefield. And Durga gets so angry that Kali springs forth from her chakra and starts going into battle in her own frenzied way. So Kali is so quick and so angry that every sword swipe she takes, she is catching those drops of blood with her sword, and then before the pieces of the demon can fall to the ground, she just eats them. Right? So she's going through this, but this is just a single-handed woman. She's just going through, she's angry, she's so blood frenzied that she's taken down all of the demons. But now she doesn't stop because she's just in bloodlust now and has lost complete control. And now the gods and goddesses are going, oh no, she's starting to just kill everybody in her path, and we've unleashed this incredible storm of destruction on the world, and what are we going to do? So the only thing that can stop Kali is her consort, and her consort is her partner, her equal. And I know that she was just born, but she already has an equal. So her consort is Shiva. And the interesting thing about Shiva is on a good day, he is the god of creation. And on a bad day, he is the god of destruction. So on this day, he's the god of creation. He's trying to save the rest of the world. So he sees his consort in this bloodless state, and he throws himself into her path. And he just throws himself down. And as she's stepping on his body, not knowing who he is, and about to take her sword swipe, she realizes who it is that she's stepping on. And I think the story goes that it's basically his energy. She feels who this is. This is her consort and her god. And in shame and in reverence, she stops. And that's the only reason that she was able to stop and the frenzy. So the point is, destruction is scary. We don't know what's on the other side. For us, it also represents failure. Especially when you think about things where it's extrinsic. You lose a job. Maybe it's really the best thing for you, but in that moment, it feels like you have utterly failed. Or maybe your relationship ends. Again, maybe it's really the best thing for you, but it really feels like you have royally screwed up. So it's scary, because we can't really see what's on the other side. We just see the moment and we make it about ourselves. I also notice it tends to have a domino effect. You start destruction. If you try to initiate and invite destruction, it seems to just keep going, even if you're trying to make it nice and neat. And I had this perfect example very recently where, so I found out around Christmas that I'm expecting. And I work from home, so it's kind of nice. I get to dictate my own schedule. And with the lower energy level that I was experiencing, I started to realize I really need to focus on the projects I really want to take on, because I just don't have the energy for this. And so this is just a month or two before the speech, and I'm thinking, oh, this is the perfect example of controlled destruction. I'll nice and neatly destroy my own projects and cut down and display this perfect example of letting go, right? So I do this nice, neat thing where I lay out all my clients and projects, and I decide which ones I want to keep and which ones don't really serve me going forward and which ones I can easily wrap up. And I think this is great. This is a perfect example. So, and all this is done based on the fact that my partner and I have agreed that his income is stable enough and high enough that he can support the both of us for a short time while we make this transition, and then we're going to revisit the whole topic. So 2 weeks after I complete my nice, neat destruction, he loses his job. I mean, I could go on to the chain of events, but the point was, it was just perfect like that. Yes, of course you can invite destruction into your life and you think you can control it, but you can't. So it's kind of scary. It's something that has invited change for both of us, and I do believe in the end it's better for both of us. I do. But in the moment, it's absolutely terrifying. Plus, no one ever says, look what I destroyed today. Kids go to their parents and they say, look what I made. Look what I created. Look what I came up with. Look what idea I solved. And they probably think they created something, but their mom's probably thinking, you just destroyed my entire living room. Yeah. So I want to leave you with this idea, and I won't read the entire quote for you. But destruction is such a necessary part of the creative cycle, that we really need to start looking at it as part of it. And destruction doesn't have to be a physical thing or a job or the living of a home or a relationship, but it can just be something as simple as an idea. Something as simple as, I've always thought that this is the way that I'm supposed to do things. Something as simple as destroying that idea. And my favorite part about this, I think the entire thing is poetic, but my favorite part is you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. Destruction before creation. Thank you. So if anyone has any questions, we can either open it up right now, or I'll just be up front if you'd like to come talk to me afterwards. Adam Carroll.
You've had lots of triggers, Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
and you're obviously in touch with yourself in terms of meditating and yoga and stuff like that. How does either the intrinsic or the extrinsic trigger hit you? Or how do you know when to respond to it?
That's a good question. I'm thinking of my experiences. I think, for me, I think we all have our own internal voice and our own internal dialogue. And so it's not always positive, right? It's not always helpful. And I think I've always experienced my intrinsic triggers. So even if there's something going on out here, and then something occurs here, my internal intrinsic triggers are this calm voice that sounds different. It's not the same chatter, it's not the same editor, like personal editor. It's not the same critic. I have a very strong critic. It's an entirely different voice, and that makes, I hope some of you can relate to that. But it's just this calm voice of reason from somewhere else entirely. And it's usually accompanied by a feeling. And the thing with triggers, I feel like they bring up so much emotional stuff, it's really hard to see through all of it. But the key is to actually let yourself feel it. Because we kind of go into panic mode, and it's like, I can't feel angry right now, I can't feel this, I can't feel that, and I have to handle this. I have to be out here, and I have to be looking for a job, or I have to be handling whatever situation, I need to be moving out of the house, whatever it is, but we just don't take the time to actually feel it. And I think that's what it comes down to, is actually taking the time to feel whatever is coming up, and then listening to whatever is coming up. Does that answer the question?
Well, I imagine it probably is easier to practice, to recognize.
I think it's easier to recognize, but I think personally, it's taken me a couple of years to see that I used to numb myself. And I would do it before I even knew I was having a feeling. I actually discovered this with anger. Anger is a fascinating emotion. I would love to do a talk about anger. But I don't think it's publicly acceptable for women in particular, and men too, but women in particular show anger. And for me, it was a really uncomfortable emotion. It still is. And so this is exemplified lately when I realized I actually have a lot of anger from a lot of stuff. But you would never know that about me. I would have said to myself, I'm not an angry person, it just doesn't come up, until I recently had an experience where I realized, actually you are. You have a lot of anger, you just have never processed it, and you're so good at suppressing the emotion that your body has suppressed it before you even have an idea that it's there. But it was starting to come out in my jaw. It was starting to come out in like small bodily ways. Yeah, in my sleep, and I'd be cutting, this is weird, I'd be cutting onions and I'd get impatient, and I'd find myself, yeah, I find myself clenching my jaw. And that's a weird little example, but it's little things like that where it starts to come out. And so I think it's like, the more you start to learn, the more you learn. So it gets easier, but the stuff that comes up is bigger. But yeah, it's the listening, like really practicing self-awareness. I would never have seen that I was actually a pretty angry person and that I was suppressed, not an angry person in general, but has a lot of anger that is undealt with. Never would have seen that if I didn't have the awareness to feel it kind of come up and then we squash it before it's even anywhere recognizable or out here. Did that answer the question? I got a little off on
And I
it.
think it's put it within the rubric you have as well. It might get easier to recognize like the calm voice, but then you have to go through the other steps.
Right, it's not like the calm voice takes care of it, right? It's like, well, this is your voice of reason, but you still have all this other stuff to take care of. Yeah.
Sarah, can you manage destruction, or is that part of the process, is the chaos and, you know,
I thought I could manage destruction, but I think life has a different way of happening. So I don't have an answer for that. I guess we'll see. I also like it, so like I was saying, you get stuck in these cycles. Some people are just chronic idea people. Part of my whole exploration of this, as my partner pointed out, before we ever started dating, he made a joke about, well, you're kind of a destroyer. You like to just burn it all down. Because I'm actually pretty good at just cutting things down, seeing things, like boiling things down, seeing things at their simplest. But it's also very easy for me to say, you know what, this isn't working, let's throw it on and start over. And so I think in some senses maybe, but in the grand scheme of life, I think when you initiate it, there's no control in it. So.
You spoke about depression and anxiety. You didn't say more about that. Do you feel that you can manage that through this process, or do you need more?
I feel like how I've changed my relationship with it is probably mostly related to yoga. So like I mentioned, my family dealt with it mostly by not really talking about it or not really doing anything about it, or antidepressants. And, you know, my mother would go through, I don't know how many people she tried, but if you've ever been on an antidepressant, you know that they stop working after a while. And really, they're not really designed for long-term maintenance. It's just, they're best for you're in an acute depressive state, and you need to not feel like, you know, you're having thoughts about harming yourself. You need to not feel like you're in a completely dark and immovable place. And so the antidepressants are just bringing you back to normal. But if you stay on them, I mean, antidepressants keep you from being down here and they bring you up, but they also keep you from being up here. Your range of emotions just shrinks. That was my experience anyway. So for me, that was how I learned to deal with it growing up. And when I started practicing yoga, I started to experience myself in a different way, and I started to experience emotions in a different way. So that's the same thing, like the suppressing. I think I was also not really dealing with whatever sadness was coming up. So my relationship to depression and anxiety has changed mostly through yoga. But like I just said, this destructive cycle that I'm even in right now, where things are changing super rapidly, that's bringing up a lot of stuff for me. And I'm also pregnant, so I mean, there's a creative process going on, just as much as there's a destructive process of my old way of life. And so I would say it's different as in I don't feel like it's sucking me down because I'm trying to focus on this process of moving through. And then I have my other tools of meditation and yoga to get me through. And that's how it's been.
So it's helping, the yoga helps.
Yeah,
I mean, it actually helps.
it actually helps. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I just wanted that to come up because I wanted you to clarify that you are not advocating that anybody just stop there.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, I would not advocate that. That was what worked for me. I have been on it.
Brought that up though, that that does help, and that's why I was glad that because I was gonna bring that up. Because they have brought that up.
Yeah, and I would not advocate that at all. It was just for me, I recognized that I'd been on them for so long that I was no longer really feeling anything. Like it was just flat.
Yeah, and I think that there's been clinical evidence of that as well, with yoga and meditation. We also know to try to commit, because we saw your schedule for just 1 second there, there's plenty of yoga on there.
Yeah.
It's also true if you know anything about antidepressants or have a friend or family member on them, some of them, it's extremely dangerous to stop them abruptly. If you're going to stop, to talk to your doctor, you have to do it gradually.
Right, I took
because of the
6
way that
months
they
to
work.
wean off.
Yeah.
6 months. So, and that involves like, yeah, a lot of discipline with that.
After doing something for a long amount of time, it'll become the status quo. So how do you not become numb when you're in the status quo, or is it even possible?
It's a good question. I think it's being open to the new thing. So I've been writing professionally now for about 3 years. And even now, there are new opportunities that are coming up that are really different. And even now, I have to re-question, am I a writer? So it's being open to the question. And I think it's also, especially when it comes to profession, not getting attached to identifying yourself as that thing. Because before I was a professional in the legal field, and that was important to me, and that meant something. And same with mediation and investigation, it has a meaning behind it. And it's hard not to impart meaning, it's hard not to take something from it, but to remove yourself just a little bit from identifying with it so that you can be open to whatever comes along. And maybe, I've been in the inquiry on that too, like, do I want to stray from that path? Is that what I know? But I'm at least open to thinking about, is this who I'm going to be next year? Am I still going to say I'm a freelance writer and editor? Or am I going to say I'm this other thing? So it's an excellent question. I'm still learning that. I think it's being open and removing yourself from the identity of that thing.
Quick, easy question.
Okay.
By the way, you do a really great job of describing, you must be an analytical person.
Yes.
You do. I like it. You mentioned that you do not like the legal writing. Can you say you're a writer? What do you write and what do you enjoy writing?
What I write is what people pay me to write. What I enjoy writing, writing for me is cathartic, and that's what I discovered when I was traveling. I had this amazing experience, and how do I describe it? And it wasn't so much for other people as it was for me to remember it and to describe it and to practice talking about it. So that's my favorite kind of writing. So I do a ton of journaling. In fact, before I write anything professionally, anything for someone else, I have to sit down and just spew whatever is there for me. It could be 1 page, it could be 3, and it could be a rant about what's going on or a funny story about the night before. But I love writing travel. I love writing creative nonfiction. So I've got a couple of pieces that I may never share with anyone else, but they're for me. And it's just a new way of looking at either my family dynamics or a situation or something else. And then I'm also experimenting with the idea of writing short fiction stories. I recently found a folder that my mom had saved for years. And I had apparently written tons of poems and stories and then completely forgotten that that's what I did when I was a kid. And I was a little bit blown away to say I was actually a writer a lot longer than I did. And so I've kind of toyed with the idea of resurrecting that. But mostly what I've been writing is lots of business, lots of lifestyle stories, events, things like that.
In the process that you described for us, what is the role of significant others and mentors?
That's a great question. I have not thought of that, so I'm just going to, okay. I think significant others and mentors can be part of the trigger, and that could be in a truly destructive way. Like, when my relationship ended, that was a trigger. That was a very, 1 minute everything's fine, and the next minute it's absolutely done. When you think about the mentor who kind of challenged me and said, why aren't you just writing? I mean, that's a mini trigger in itself. Why aren't you just writing? And so many people have said that to me before. He wasn't the first one. But something about the way he said it, in that moment, I was finally able to hear it and feel like, okay. So I think that they can be catalysts. And you may look at it as a positive or a negative, but I truly like to think that all of the changes we go through are for our higher good. And I'm sure there's other ways that they come into it, probably analysis, and data, all sorts of things. That's what comes to mind.